Welcome to the Strategic Veteran, where we chart the course from service to civilian triumph. I'm Adam Peters, a veteran, entrepreneur, and your fellow navigator in the quest for a life of impact and fulfillment. My mission is simple: to empower you with the tools and stories that turn challenge into opportunity. Having walked the path from active duty to where I stand now, I understand the search for purpose that comes with hanging up the uniform. It's a path I've walked, with its trials, its tribulations, and its victories, and it's a journey we're on together. This podcast is more than just conversation. It's a beacon for those seeking to redefine our missions through entrepreneurship. It's about igniting the entrepreneurial spirit that lives within us, the spirit that compels us to create, lead, and make our mark on the world. Here we connect with veterans who have built businesses, sparked change, and found their purpose in the marketplace of ideas. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. They've transformed their service into startups, their experiences into enterprises, and they're proof that you can too. So whether you're scribbling business plans on napkins or stepping into the arena of innovation, remember, you're not alone. You're in good company. So let's explore these stories of transformation and take the first steps together on our path to purpose. Let's begin. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Strategic Veteran. I'm your host, Adam Peters, and today we have the honor of speaking with Mr. Brian Fleming, a retired U.S. Army sergeant whose story of resilience and triumph is nothing short of extraordinary. Brian served for 4 years in the United States Army as an infantry team leader, where he faced some of the most harrowing experiences imaginable. His service included 2 near-death encounters, first with an IED and then with a suicide bomber attack in Kandahar, Afghanistan on July 24th of 2006, which left him severely injured. Brian's bravery and sacrifice earned him a Purple Heart, and he spent 14 months at Brook Army Medical Center enduring painful burn treatments, reconstructive surgery, and a brain injury rehabilitation. Brian's journey from a wounded warrior to a global speaker and author is a testament to his resilience and determination. Inspired by the events of 9/11, he joined the military to serve his country, and his experiences in the battlefield profoundly shaped his life and career choices. After transitioning out of the Army, Brian initially struggled to find his next mission, but soon discovered a new purpose: helping fellow trauma survivors heal by sharing their stories. Over the past 16 years, Brian has spoken to over 500,000 people around the world, authored 4 books, and been featured on nearly every major news network in America. His mission is to show other trauma survivors how to move forward in life and discover more healing through the power of storytelling. As the founder of Use Your Story, Brian empowers others to transform their lives by sharing their experiences in a way that is helpful, productive, and healing. Join us today as we delve into Brian's incredible journey, exploring his military experiences, his challenges during his recovery, and his ongoing mission to support and inspire others. So let's dive in and warmly welcome Brian Fleming, a true embodiment of what it means to be a strategic veteran. Brian, brother, thank you so much for being here. I really super grateful that you're here to share your story.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Let's dive right in. Let's talk about where did you grow up and what inspired you to ultimately join the Army.
I grew up in southern Michigan playing Rambo in the woods and using sticks for machine guns with my brother, who's a year and a half older than me. And we used to hit each other with them too. And we have pictures of him and I in camo and all kinds of stuff, paint mud on our faces. And he ended up joining the Marine Corps. I got into the Army. We both deployed, Iraq, Afghanistan, and he went to Iraq, I went to Afghanistan, and so it was just kind of a sign of things to come in the future. And I joined the Army in 2003, right out of high school, as a infantry 11 Bravo, because really it was a couple of things. For the reason I joined. I joined because one, I was really tired of studying. I did really well in high school because I just studied my brains out, and I needed a break before college. And I thought, I need to shoot some big guns, blow some stuff up, jump out of some airplanes. I did all that, had some of that come back at me in a way I wouldn't have hoped, but it did. And on top of that, it was post 9/11, a couple of years right after 9/11, and we were in the heat of it in Afghanistan. And I really just, I'd been around the world at that point. I lived in multiple foreign countries and visited even more, even at that age of 18 while I was still in high school. And America is such an exception. People in America have no idea how bad like 80% of the rest of the world has to live. But I've been to so many of those places, and I thought, I never want anyone to be able to say to me like, you get to live in America and enjoy all this because someone else made it possible for you. Like, you didn't contribute anything to it. And that's not, to be taken wrong by anyone who did not or could not get in the military. That was just where I felt led, and that was my personal conviction towards it.
So you've always felt maybe called to serve something bigger than yourself. Is that a fair statement?
Uh, yeah, I would say I've always believed there's something greater going on that I'm supposed to be a part of, even at different points in my life, even though I didn't know what they were.
That's fair. Yeah, I like that. You went to basic training in 2003. By chance, what was your basic active service date?
It was August 23rd of 2003. Arrived at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Brother, we were in basic training at the same time.
No kidding, Sand Hill.
Yeah, my basic active service date was June 24th, 2003. I was Echo 258 at Fort Benning. I graduated October. Yeah, yeah. So we would have been there at the same time because I was there getting ready to finish. You were probably lined up watching me walk back from Honor Hill, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think you guys were on the other side of the barracks building. We were on the front side. There was like the other bays were on the back side. That must have been you all.
Yeah, that would have been us, Echo 258. Do you remember there was a drill sergeant who was actually assigned to 258, but was I think over on the other side helping out? Drill Sergeant Dodge by chance? Does that ring a bell?
Vaguely, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I won't ever forget that dude because
Yeah, he wasn't one of mine.
yeah, I'll never forget that dude because he had like been detailed to some other platoon in another battalion or whatever. But like the ghost, the private news network stories about how awful he was as a drill sergeant and all that, and it turned out he was really a really good leader and a really good drill sergeant for our platoon. But I thought that was interesting because you're the first person I've had on the show that would have been basically kind of paralleling my career. So that's really awesome, man. Did you grow up in like a military family? You said you lived in lots of foreign countries and saw the world, or did you just that was your thing to do as a family was travel the world?
Yeah, I just had the opportunity to travel when I was younger, but the only military I had in my family really was, grandfather was in the Navy uh, during Vietnam. Then my uncle, who's just a few years older than me, he was in the Navy. He was on submarines. Then my brother obviously went in the Marine Corps. In fact, 9/11 happened 2 weeks before he graduated from boot camp in San Diego, and he has this funny story. He says, you're 2 weeks away from graduating at MCRD San Diego. And he said all the drill instructors came in and they started yelling. They rolled in a TV and said, "You're all going to war, blah blah blah," and everyone's perplexed and confused. And they're like, "You've been telling us that for 3.5 months. What's different?"
Yeah, what's new?
Then they turned
right?
on the
Yeah.
yeah. Then you saw the airplanes fly into the World Trade Center. It's like, oh, this shit just got real. And yeah. So he was in the Marines as well.
So 9/11, you obviously like me played a big role in you deciding to join with kind of that sense of serving something bigger than yourself. So we're going to talk at length about what ended your career and kind of all that stuff. But can you first share some of the insights or the key experiences that you learned as an infantry team leader and how those kind of shape you today?
Yeah. As the leader, the number one rule of leadership: everything is your fault, and I live by it to this day. Man. I go speak for companies, and I speak on leadership. And I say, who knows what the number one rule of leadership is? They go, lead by example and all this other stuff, and it's all good stuff. But I go, nope. You know what it is? Everything is your fault. Because when everything goes right, you got to share the credit. When it all goes bad, everyone looks solely at you and nobody else. So yeah, I mean, just it was a pretty hard learning experience actually, because I really didn't have anyone to teach me growing up. My father wasn't around much, and so I didn't have anyone to really kind of mentor me into manhood at the point I went in the military. And so I'm really grateful for the military because it taught me a lot of those things, leadership and structure and things like that, that helped me become the man I am today. But every basically the way I see the world, whenever I have a problem or I have something I want to accomplish or do, I basically just write out an operations order, because I don't have a framework for life really that I was given by anyone else, but I know how to plan and carry out missions in war zones. And life is pretty much a war zone, and all the aspects are parallel. They all apply to life. I don't, set near and far ambushes anymore. I take that out, obviously. But I'm not on the side of I-75, laying in ambush. But
So you never forgot the 5 paragraphs to an op order. You remember Sergeant Major eats sugar cookies, right?
yep, that's right. Yep, he likes his sugar cookies, and you don't walk across his grass. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Get off my grass. Yeah, I remember that, man. So let's talk about right. He planted it himself. He's out there trimming it with scissors. Yeah, 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 yeah. So let's talk about so you graduated basic training probably sometime around November-ish of '03, and what was your first unit?
I went to uh, 2-9, which is part of the Second Infantry Division in South Korea at Camp Casey. I spent my first year there.
Back in the Korea days, yeah, man. I finished my career with the second ID at Fort Lewis, so that's another kind of cool parallel. Basic training in the same time, kind of get out in the same unit with the second ID. That's awesome. And
Something that was interesting when I arrived, not everyone could go home for Christmas break because I arrived the week. I arrived at midnight of Christmas Eve, and everyone's off for like 2 or 3 weeks, and you know what happens in a barracks when there's 3 weeks or 2 weeks of no work, drinking 24/7. Everyone's drunk. I'd never seen an E5. I was an E2. I got my bag. It's like 2 in the morning. I'm getting in. I had this E5 come up yelling at me, throws his ID card at me. You better stand at parade rest. And he's got a beer in his hand. And I'm just like, Roger, like, whoa. It was like a rude awakening. And once I played it cool, they were just like, hey, here's a beer, grab your shit, just come on. But yeah, man, I arrived at my first unit.
I'm glad you had it that way because when I got to the third ID, it was the extreme opposite for me. Those guys had just come home 2 weeks to a month from the invasion of Iraq before I reported. So my life was absolutely miserable. And you can remember back to those days, we're running around a BDU still. So everything pressed and starched and boots shined. But back then on your left shoulder, if you hadn't been deployed, you didn't even have a flag, right? So now I've got no rank, no flag, no CIB, no combat patch. It's a rough life for a private. So at least your experience at least your experience was a little bit better than mine. However, it was still probably not pleasant. Let's talk about. So, did you know you were going to Afghanistan as soon as you got to Camp Casey, or did you have a significant amount of train up and kind of building up to the deployment? What did that look like for you?
Well, I didn't deploy from Camp Casey. I spent my year there in South Korea with the second ID, and then I got reassigned PCS to the 10th Mountain Division, which is interesting because they gave me orders in South Korea. It said 10th Mountain Division, and then it said Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I took the orders back to my branch manager. I said, hey, Fort, 10th Mountain's at Fort Drum. This says Fort Polk, Louisiana. These are wrong. And they go, no, Private Fleming, you're wrong. The 10th Mountain Division is standing up a new 4th Brigade at Fort Polk. And so I was like, okay. And I knew they were deploying like within a year of me getting there. And so, so you're sending me to a light infantry mountain warfare brigade in a swamp to train to go to Afghanistan to fight war in the mountains. That's where I first learned about the words military intelligence. I'm like, this doesn't what? So I got PCS to 10th Mountain Division. I was basically the only a person E4 below that was not fresh out of basic training. So I got promoted a couple times over everybody else, because it was needs of the army, and I was qualified in different ways, and probably not ready for that second one when I got it, but I ran with it. Made a ton of mistakes. Um, your friends kind of turn on you when you get promoted over them, and then like, oh, it happened again, and it's like, dude, I know I'm still learning too. I'm like 19, 20 years old, so I'm there, and we train up for the year. Over the course of the year, we train up, arrive there, and run late, or actually January of '05. I was there for a year. We deployed in March of '06.
Okay, so March of '06. So let's talk about how were you feeling about going on this deployment? I remember my first deployment, I was like, yeah, it's time, right? Like we're ready, we train, and then you get there and it's a whole different fucking feeling, right? Like it's you can't. I don't even know if you can put it to words unless you've actually experienced it. But were you ready to go? Did you feel like you had adequate training and you're prepared to go do this thing?
I did. I felt we were adequately prepared, and I just got married 3 months prior in December, so I had a few months home with my wife. Then it was a kiss goodbye, and I hope I see you again, kind of thing. But yeah, we arrived in Kandahar, got out the plane. It stunk. It was hot and it stunk. Um, but I felt prepared as much as we could be. We trained up, and yeah, it's a whole different world over there.
It's nice that Kandahar province is at least a little bit flat, so you're not like not training in the mountains and then getting sent to the mountains, right? Because I was in Kandahar for my last deployment. I was actually in the Panjwai district out in Kop Mushan, way out in the Horn, with birthplace of the Taliban, really. So super familiar with that. I'm curious, what did Kandahar look like in 2006? Because 6 years later, that place was speeding tickets, PT belts, TGI Fridays, boardwalk, right? Like that whole situation.
Well, because I went back in 2013 for a week. I was able to go back and with a group and like speak to the troops, that kind of thing. Man, they had made so much progress. It looked so different, um, crazy. But in 2006, I mean, it was a typical third world country, what you'd think of. Um, just not a whole lot to it. Just what you'd think of like a rundown city. It's pretty much a rundown third world city, which it didn't improve. I mean, it did improve. I mean, considering it's a developing country, I guess you could say, but nothing like you see in America.
Right, right. Yeah, I don't know if we can call it developing anymore with what's currently going on over there, but that's
Yeah,
for a whole nother
it got
different
dumped.
kind of conversation.
Yeah, the shit show. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, man. So, what were you guys doing? What was the primary mission over there, leading up to July 24th?
yeah. I was in a scout sniper platoon, so the battalion scout platoon. I was a team leader in one of the scout squads, and it was mainly we were the commander's kind of right hand team, like the battalion commander, the colonel. Whenever he wanted something to happen, he would kind of send us out on these different missions, but also a lot of it was reconnaissance, obviously, in that kind of platoon, and lots of those orders in the missions, in the op order where it says the mission is to confirm or deny enemy presence, which all that means is go out there. If you get blown up or shot at, they're here. And so they're here. We're shooting back, and we lost a vehicle. It got blasted. And so there was a lot of that. A lot of uh, missions that were sort of, sometimes they were a few days planned out. We had a month-long mission that was completely out there living it for a month. We're out in the mountains without coming back to the fob. Other times it would be, hey, it's 11:30 at night, wake up, there's a Taliban leader meeting 10 minutes down the street, grab your shit. We're going to crash the party. We're going to assist the special forces team that's already en route, and go. So I mean, lots of different things.
Just ran the gamut. I mean, that's because that's still really early. I mean, I guess not super early. We're 5 years into the war in Afghanistan at that point. But so you were involved in two incidents: the IED explosion and then the VB IED. Correct? It was a VB IED that took you out. So let's talk about the first incident and that IED explosion. What were you doing, and kind of what was, I don't know. This is a tough question to ask, having been involved in several different IED blasts myself. But like, some of the ones I was in, it's like go to the doc, take some Tylenol, you're going to be fine. Back out on patrol the next day, and then obviously some other ones that we lose some guys. So, what were you doing, and kind of how did that incident kind of go down?
Yeah, we had been on the mission for probably 3 or 4 days, I think, at that point, if I recall it correctly. And it was about 7 o'clock in the morning. We had our vehicle staged in this particular high ground spot out in the Arghandab River Valley, and the sun was coming up. We packed our stuff, got in the vehicles. I was in the lead vehicle. We had about 5 vehicles with us. We went up over a hill, came down the hill, and where the hill flattened out, there was a double stack of anti-tank mines buried in the road. And our back tire on passenger side ran it over. And so I was in the back seat on the driver's side. So it was on the opposite side of me, back tire. And it blew the vehicle up, set it on fire, threw it about, I don't know, 10 feet to the side of the road. I was physically not harmed. I mean, I remember everything just sort of stood, everything just got smoky and dusty. And it's like everything went in slow motion. You don't even have time to comprehend what's happening until all the dust is starting to settle. And so that happened. My gunner popped up in the turret and then fell back down in the turret, and he's laying next to me after it, came crashing down. Uh, I was uninjured physically. I later learned that I actually had TBI symptoms, but I wasn't bleeding. Or I didn't bash my head or anything, and so everyone seemed pretty fine. But the vehicle's on fire, so it's like, is everyone good? Everyone good? All right, get out, get out. And so the guy next to me, who the explosion went off underneath his seat, he was just sort of hunched over, like leaning forward. And this is a really tough dude. Him and I didn't always really ever get along, and I know it was usually my fault because of where I was as a person and not knowing how to deal with things or maybe lead properly sometimes. But he was a really tough dude, and he's not the kind of guy who's just going to lay there hunched forward. Like there's none of that. So I thought, damn, like this is serious. So I got out, I ran around the back of the vehicle, popped his door open. I said, "Hey, come on, let's go, get out." And he his legs were he had fire near his legs in the vehicle, and so I grabbed his body armor because he wasn't responsive. I just drug him out of the door there. And my squad leader, who was the TC, he was in the front passenger seat. His door was jammed shut by the blast, so he crawled through the back of the Humvee and got out that same door. The driver got out. The gunner, he had crawled out too. Uh, the gunner and the guy I pulled out, they were both injured, both got Purple Hearts. Thankfully, they weren't injured so severely that it put them out completely because they both returned to duty within the month. Thankfully, at full capacity, and so we were one vehicle short. We waited like was it a whole day, maybe 2 days, maybe a day, and they had to send a Chinook out with the big old Q-tips, and you hook up the vehicle with the straps, and it lifts this wreckage because you can't leave it out there. You don't want the enemy getting anything about it, or you know, like you said earlier, everything ended up getting left there anyway in the future, but we won't go there. But we don't leave our shit behind. We don't even leave water bottles behind. Like we'll cut them open so nobody can drink them. If we can't drink them. So, but anyway, we waited like an extra day or two for that, and then other vehicles came out and delivered another vehicle because we were vehicles short. So with the people we had left, there weren't enough vehicles for everyone to fit in. So day or two later, we got another vehicle delivered. Like the line company came out with their vehicles, and so after that, the wreckage was taken. We were heading back towards the fob, which was about a 2-day journey. And on the way back, we received a follow on mission. They're like, "Oh, hey, before you come back, you know, go to this part, do this." I don't remember what it was, but yeah, a lot of people say, "Oh, wow, you probably got like the weekend off, and they probably took care of you and checked you out, probably had you on being monitored to make sure." Like, no, we had a follow-on mission to go fight Taliban or get into it. Like, it's like there's no slow. Like, this is what we do, and no one thought anything of it because that's what you're trained to do. It's only, I think, people who weren't in the military are kind of shocked by that. And so we got back about 2 days later, and I'll tell you something really interesting that happened. Uh, the day I returned back, I had an email waiting for me from my mother. And I'm not going to get real uber spiritual on anybody, but this is what happened. The day I returned back, she had written me an email, and she basically said, "Hey Brian, this is going to sound crazy, but about 2 days ago, I was driving to the store up near like Rochester, New York. Hadn't spoken to her in probably a week or two. She said, I was driving to the store and I got this sudden feeling that just overwhelmed me. Like, and I started praying for you and your unit." And she said it was so strong, I started crying and I had to pull off to the side of the road because I couldn't see. And she said, "I just wanted to let you know, I don't know if that means anything, but Hope you're doing well. I did write her back. I didn't tell her what happened, obviously, but I did tell her, hey, something happened that would certainly encourage a little extra prayer. And I asked her what time it was, time difference, everything. And it turned out to be around that same time from opposite ends of the world where she had this sudden feeling of like panic in her, I guess you say her mind, her spirit, whatever you want to call it. And that was just incredible to me. So, for anyone out there in the faith communities, um, people call it women's intuition. I always just say, God tells women everything. And I think there's some truth to that.
Brother, you're not the first person I've met in my travels that has told me a story similar to that, particularly on deployments I have been on. So I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I'm a spiritual person as well now. Haven't always been, but definitely the universe or God or whatever it is that the people listening believe in or subscribe to definitely has a way of leaving clues for us, I think.
Everything seems connected in a way that we just don't really fully understand. That's probably the best I can say it. Because too many things like this happen to be total coincidence. Yeah.
I would agree with that statement 100%. So you have this first IED explosion. I agree with what you said. Most people think they're monitoring you, taking care of you, and actually you're pulling security on the wreckage from this IED blast after you medevac the two guys out for another day or two, and then you're doing a follow-on mission for another 2 days before you're actually going back to the cop to like gather your thoughts and take a breath for a minute. So how long before the next attack, the one that got you?
Yep. That first explosion we just discussed, that was on April 18th of 2006. The second blast that injured me was on July 24th of '06. And here's what's interesting about this. I generally wouldn't have been in the place I was if not for one thing. So I got to know the EOD team, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. The bomb squad. For anyone who doesn't know, it's the military's bomb squad. Well, we had an EOD team on our fob up at Fob Lagman in Kalat, about an hour or two north of Kandahar, and I started talking to them. They were telling me about EOD. I noticed they were like three people who got to sit around and do what they want and have their own schedule. Like them in the special forces camp, like they did what they wanted. Everyone else was like, everyone had to do whatever. Um, and so I was talking to them about what they do, and I said that's really interesting. And I don't know why, even after the first IED, that I was interested in maybe doing EOD. So I started pursuing the path of reclassing from infantry to EOD. And there was turns out there was a P3, it's called, on my medical profile. That means you're basically unfit for duty physically, which is weird because I had been running up and down mountains fighting Taliban and getting blown up and shot at for 5 months. And I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm 160 pounds. I'm wearing 100 pounds of gear, and I'm running up and down mountains at 8 to 13,000 feet in elevation, fighting people wearing bed sheets and a pair of Crocs with an AK-47 who grew up here. And so, like, I'm in killer shape. Well, they said we can't do anything. You have to get evaluated by a doctor to get it off there. We don't have the doctor here. You have to go to Kandahar Airfield to do that. So I thought, okay. So I arranged to be able to go down to Kandahar Airfield, get looked at, breathe through a tube or whatever. And all right, good, right? All right. Well, I was going down there for the purpose of completing the next step of reclassing from infantry to EOD, and I got blown up on the way. So I always say it's like it's kind of like a sign of like, oh, this is not what you're supposed to do with your life. You thought it was, but this isn't. Yeah, yeah. I'm careful. I used to say that too. I'm careful with it because I don't want anyone to think that, like, quote, God sent the suicide bomber or anything like that. The guy made his own decision, and but what happened was we were 2 miles away from the main gate to Kandahar, and I was in my first sergeant's Humvee, so I got my first sergeant's Humvee blown up. But we were 2 miles away, and I don't even remember it happening. But what happened was a suicide bomber in a minivan of a VBIG, vehicle-borne IED. He drove his minivan straight into my door. I was in the front passenger seat, the TC, of the lead vehicle of this 12 or 15 vehicle convoy. He drove straight into my door and exploded, blew it into millions of pieces, blew himself into millions of pieces. The lieutenant behind me, he said he'd never seen an explosion that big. He said it must have went a few hundred feet into the sky. He said it was massive. Everything got black, like I guess from his vantage point, because the blast was so huge. And I woke up uh, not knowing what happened. I woke up laying in a ditch on the side of Highway 1 in Kandahar, and I was face down. I was I was in a pool of my own blood because my face was just bleeding like crazy. My face and neck were burned second degree. Both my hands were third degree, all of which is healed now, thankfully. But I woke up, thankfully, my driver, Mike, he's actually a medic, so that came in really handy. And thankfully, he wasn't injured. Me and the gunner were both severely injured, and he got both of us out. And he called in the 9-line medevac. And then he also, when it came in, helped me to the helicopter, which, there's ways to board a helicopter. You prepare at the LZ, there's all the protocol. Well, when you're like dazed and it's 130 out and you're burned open second and third degree and you're in a desert and there's car parts and body parts everywhere, you're like, okay, yeah, oh, there's the bird. It took him a half hour to get there, which is kind of record time, so I was quite impressed. But what I forgot is about a little thing called rotor wash. When a helicopter gets about 20 to 50 feet off the ground, anything not anchored down just flies everywhere. And we're in a desert, so there's lots of sand. So I'm standing there waiting to, for it to come down so we can load. And normally you turn away. You turn away so you don't get blasted in the eyes with dirt and debris. Well, I'm just standing there watching it come down, not even thinking, and whoosh. I felt like I got sandblasted. My burned hands, my burned face, my burned neck. I have sand, just millions of pieces of sand just peppered into me. And it was one of those things where you kind of look at the sky and you're like, seriously? You're like, what the fuck? Like, I think I said that out loud. That's what I said. Because it was like, this is bad enough. And then, oh, here's some sand in your face. It's just like, you can't believe this. Like, you can't make this stuff up. So it lands. We get, exactly. And so we get on the bird, we fly back in, we get off. I'm able to walk, so I'm walking, but they get me in there. I'm laying on a table like a gurney for probably 20 minutes, and they hadn't given me any medication yet. My adrenaline is wearing off. I'm starting to feel things. Out on the battlefield, I couldn't feel anything. My adrenaline was so high, it was numbing my body. Well, now everything was calm and it was coming down, and I was starting to become in a lot of pain from the burns. And so this guy walked by, um, and he said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I'm like, I've had better days. You ever have one of those days when you wake up and you have a bad year? It's kind of like, I think that just happened. And so he goes, well, hey, he goes, can I take your picture? And I said, you what? He's like, can I take your picture? Like, this guy's really happy. I think he had tacos for lunch. It was like, it was a good day for him. And I said, yeah, but can I get some medicine, man? I'm hurting. Well, he snapped a picture of me. He put, and I smiled for the picture. I couldn't let Taliban think they got the drop on me too bad. And so he put this picture he burned it to a disc and put it in a box that got sent home with me. So I now have this picture of my face burned off. It's bloody and nasty, and I'm smiling at it. And I think it was more of instinct, like smile for the picture. Like, I'm that guy. I'm the guy they have to tell you, like, we have to take 10 takes because you kept making a stupid face. Like, be serious. So I'm the guy who smiles in pictures. So it was more instinct, I think, than anything. But he never got me any medication, so I didn't get any for a while. So he must not have been a medic, maybe a photographer. I don't know. But I have that picture. Could have been. No, and I don't think he meant anything by it. I'm actually so grateful because he didn't have to do that. But now I have a picture. Like you can't tell by looking at me that my face was burned off second and third, like second degree on the front and my neck, uh, little third degree on the back because I've healed at this point. Well, I have a picture from 30 minutes after getting blasted on the side of the road, and if you go to blownupguy.com, that's my speaker website. I actually have all those pictures on there. If anyone listening wants to actually see them, just go to blownupguy.com because I'm a guy. I got blown up, and there's been thousands of guys like me who got blown up. I'm just the guy who bought the .com for $9 back in 2008 because I thought it'd be funny. Turns out it was the best marketing decision I ever made as a speaker, and I didn't know anything about marketing. So, but yeah, if you want to see those, go check it out. You'll see both the vehicles. You'll see me blasted and to bloody hell.
So you're saying you woke up on the side of the road. I assume your driver, the medic, probably dragged you out of the Humvee, or were you actually blown out of the Humvee?
For about 8 or 9 years, I thought I was blown out of the Humvee because I hadn't reconnected with him. I reconnected with him almost a decade later, and I found that he had actually drugged me out. There was white phosphorus on the outside of my door, so he couldn't actually get my door open because the white phosphorus was burning on the armor plating. And so he actually grabbed me, drugged me over the friggin' radio mount into his seat and out his door, and then he got the gunner out the back door too. I mean, the guy was absolutely fucking stellar at his job. When push came to shove and it was real and it was combat, he went into like medic mode and he just killed it completely. I could not be more proud and grateful that I had him right by my side that day. He saved my life.
Hopefully he got the proper award that he deserves for that. Not that he's chasing a fruit salad or anything, but they deserve to be recognized for
He got something. I think he should have gotten the next one higher, but yeah, he performed stellar in combat.
Yeah, that's usually how it works out for us enlisted guys, but again another conversation. So so when did you actually realize the extent of your injuries? Was it laying there on the gurney at the hospital? I assume you were medevac to CAF, if I had to guess at the time, and then from there you went to Germany and then ultimately back to Brook, right?
Yeah, I went from Kandahar to Bagram. Yeah, well, I went from Kandahar to Bagram to Landstuhl to San Antonio.
Got it. So when did you realize, kind of the extent of your injuries and how bad you were hurt?
Well, I started to get the idea when they'd given me some medication, kind of doped me up. I was kind of sleeping, not sleeping, on and off for probably about 12 hours after that happened. And they wouldn't give me a mirror. I'm like, my face hurts really bad. And I don't mean to keep making light of it, but I mean, sarcasm and humor is my coping mechanism. You ever seen that movie Tommy Boy with Chris Farley?
Yes, love it.
There he gets hit in the face and he's like, man, what happened?
Not
Like,
so much here, not so much
here,
here, but right
right
here.
here. It's like the whole thing. It's like
Yeah.
that was like what it felt like on my face. My hands. So they wouldn't give me a mirror. And so I'm like, okay, this must be really bad. And my medic had come in hours later and explained to me what happened. It's like, yeah, it's a VBID, some suicide bomber. He drove straight into us, right into your freaking door. But he was the only one who died, the suicide bomber, that day. So my hat's off to him. Sort of mission accomplished, left-handed salute, sort of. And because of him, I got a Purple Heart. And that's why my Purple Heart license plate now says "nice try" on my truck because, nice try. So
You're all in on the humor with this. I love that, man. I think that's super powerful. And, don't apologize for making light of your situation because you're right, man. There's so many different ways to cope. And I think this is important for veterans to see. Like, just because something devastating happened to you doesn't mean that you can't make it through it and make light of it and turn it into something.
yeah, and I'm joking about my story, not somebody else's horrible story. But yeah, it's like, all right. So my truck, the Purple Heart plate says "nice try," and then on my other car, on my Jeep, I put it says "slow mover" because I didn't get out of the way. Because I had this thing with a buddy of mine. we this buddy of mine, he was a Navy SEAL. I was talking to him one day. We both had Purple Hearts, and I'm like, yeah, man, got that darn enemy marksmanship badge. They reached out and touched me. He goes, oh yeah, man, and he's like, I got me a slow mover award too. Purple Heart because he didn't get out of the way in time. And it's Jay Redmond's his name. He's a Navy SEAL. He's a speaker. He's written a few books too, and he got shot like 9 times from like damn near point blank. It was like a close, very near ambush that they just got completely taken by surprise. And so yeah, him and I joke about the different names we call the Purple Heart. And I even I had a guy at the gym yesterday go, he saw my Jeep and he goes, "Is that your Purple Heart? You got a purple? I've never known someone with a Purple Heart." I'm like, "Yeah, wrong place, wrong time." He's like, "Well, congratulations. I want to congratulate." I'm like, "Thanks, man. I appreciate, your kindness. Wrong place, wrong time." Like that's the one nobody wants, but I didn't go into it, but it was kind of funny.
Um, when how did you at what point did you start to really feel the emotional and mental effects of your injuries and the event that took place, and what did that look like for you? How did that actually affect you?
Yeah, before we get there, I want to preface it what would be a good segue into that. I I was from Kandahar to San Antonio in 3 days. So, the Air Force, once the Air Force got their hands on me, like it was smooth sailing. It's like the Ritz Carlton of medevacs, you know. And so, I mean, they were absolutely stellar. There's some 19-year-old kid putting a nerve block in my shoulder. I'm watching him do it. He's like consciously sedating me, and I'm looking at it. And I'm like, this kid looks like he's 12, but he's doing his job just stellar. And they got me back to the medical center. I arrived at about midnight. It was a Friday night, July 27th of '06. I arrived at Brook Army Medical Center, and they got me in from the helicopter into the hospital. My wife was actually already there, so I got to see her in the hallway, and that was the first time she'd seen me, obviously in 5 months, and I had dried blood, ooze, just gunk, mucus. Your membranes are just like running all out because the top layer of my skin was burned off and it was dried and kind of encrusted on my face and lips. I looked nasty. And my wife came up to the gurney I was on and gave me a hug, kissed me right on my dirty, burned, nasty lips. I knew at that point she wasn't going anywhere. She was in for good with me. And I always knew that, but nothing tells you that more because I told her, you don't have to kiss me. Like you showed up. Like I know you're faithful. I know you're here for me. You don't have to kiss my lips. I don't want to lick my lips, let alone like have you kiss them. Well, she did. And that's the kind of wife I have. And we've been married for over 18 years now. But what happened right after that, they took me into a shower room and they took my clothes off and laying there naked on this metal table. And the head nurse looked at me and he said, "All right, Sergeant Fleming, we're going to do this as quickly as possible. So it'll be as painless as possible." And I had no idea what he was talking about. Nobody had told me what they have to do for severe burns. What they do is a process called debridement, where they have to take razor blades and literally shave and like pull and like scrape off the dirty, burn, charred skin. Because if they don't, you're going to die of infection. And so him and 3 other nurses all grabbed razor blades and they just started going at me. It was the absolute worst pain physically. There's no word in any language I've ever heard that can describe how horrifically painful that process is. And it was one of those times where like I wasn't suicidal, but I wanted to die. Like I prayed to die. Like just let me just like fall asleep, die. Like everyone will be fine. It was if I can just not be conscious. And they said they're going to do it as fast as they could, and it took about 30 minutes. And it was 30 minutes of just pure fucking hell.
I'm curious because, having all the medical training that I got as an infantryman over 12 and a half years, right? Like you're taught burns are really, really bad injuries, right? Because of the risk of infection, and they're also supposedly, and I guess you're a testament to this, they're the most painful type of injury that you get as well. And my question, I guess, follow up question to that is why do you have to be awake for that process? Why can't they knock you out? And, you know,
Well, I was told two things. One, if they sedate you and then knock you out, they often have to do it more than once. And I guess there's a fear, or at least back then there was, if they had to sedate you and put you under multiple times, they're afraid you might slip into a coma. But then they also have to do it fast because you can go into shock from the pain. And so it's just this horrible thing you just have to lay there and take. Like I wanted to start grabbing and fighting them because it was just my pain, just my survival brain kicking in. I'm being basically filleted alive here. And I knew in the back of my mind, though, I knew in the back of my mind, if I fight them, this is just going to take longer. And it's like, let's just get it over with. And I thank God for unanswered prayers. I'm grateful I didn't get what I was hoping I would get in that moment, because when you're going through like the pain you're in, when you're in that war, when you're on your battlefield, whatever it is you're going through in life, you are surrounded by the fog of war. And I know you know what that is. It's basically, for anyone who doesn't know, basically you've been on your own battlefield so long, you're so familiar with everything, and you can only see a few inches in front of you. You can't see the whole big picture of what's going on. You can only see what's going on immediately in front of you. You can't see 6 months, a year, 6 years down the road. You just can't see that because you're so focused on what you're going through because you're trying to get through it. And so it was one of those cases where it was just a big blind spot. And they got done, uh, and then they did reconstructive surgery. They skin grafted skin from my thighs onto my hands. And what's interesting is that the doctor, he said that night, he said, the surgeon, he said, "Hey, we might have to skin graft your face." And I was like, "Okay." And you would definitely have to do your hands, which they did. He said, and for some reason, he thought it was important to tell me where they start taking skin from when they start doing skin grafts. They usually start the donor sites where they take skin from in places on your body that are normally covered up, so there won't be too much scarring visible in your future. They usually start from your rear end, taking skin off your butt. So what I heard in my drugged up state at that point, they're going to take skin off my ass and put it on my face. And so I'm thinking, wait, you can't do that, man. Like, I know I don't have a tattoo there because that'd be really weird if it ended up here. But like, I'm thinking in this state, I'm thinking my wife will never kiss me again. All those names I was called as a kid, they'll be true, and I can't live with that. Like, eh, are you sure you have to do this? He goes, I'm going to give you till Monday. If your face starts healing, we won't graft your face. And they didn't. But I just thought that was like, wait a minute. Yeah, so I tell people all the time when I speak and when I shake their hands afterwards, I say, hey, if you shake my hand today, just so you know where that skin came from. And then I tell them it didn't come from my butt, it came from my thighs, which is a little bit less weird, but not really. And my wife makes fun of the fact that I have leg hair on my hands and my fingers. But if that's the worst thing to come out of it, it's not a bad gig, I guess.
Yeah, so you were close to being an ass face. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that before from some guys that I served with that did get burns and had to have, not on their face, but they did have the skin from their ass grafted to other areas. And
And there were other guys in there way worse off than me. I had one friend in there, Merlin German. He died a few years later. He a young Marine, and he was burned, I think, like 97 or 98% of his body, third degree. They hit a diesel bomb in Iraq, and it threw him out of the turret, and he caught on fire on the side of the road. Absolutely terrible. But it was guys like him and other guys in there that were even way worse off than me, where I looked at them, and they're cracking jokes, they're getting through stuff, and the guy who you can't recognize because he's burned so bad, you know, is in the bed next to the guy with no legs. And so when the guy with no legs comes back in, and the truck goes to hop from his bed or his chair into his wheelchair, and the burn guy pulls the wheelchair out from under him, and he falls on the floor, and they start swearing and yelling at each other, and just being what the infantry guys do to each other. Uh, the medical center was a pretty depressing, bad, painful place, but there were these pockets of comic relief that, like, you couldn't make it up. It's just guys fucking with each other. It's like, and he was so healthy. Like that's what we needed. And yeah,
Yeah, and I wanted, yeah, that it's, I'm so glad you shared that with us because I've kind of always wondered, right? So you're in a burn unit, and that's just incredible pain from what I've been told, right? We had a guy who
it's bad.
he got burned very significantly while we were in Afghanistan as well. And I can remember him telling stories about the pain that comes with that, not only from having to scrape with razor blades the skin, but then they have to wash it out, which is also extremely painful. And then the grafts, right? And it's not just one and done, right? Like you probably went through several surgeries for the grafts. And I've heard that's just a harrowing, just terrifyingly painful experience. And so it's cool to hear that we do this in the infantry, right? Like we just make light of shitty situations all the time, i.e., the pulling the wheelchair out from the no legs guy, the burn guy. Like, and that's really how I guess kind of we cope. And so I'm glad that you guys had that, and that kind of aura kind of carries on, because I think that's probably a very significant part of you healing, right? And actually being able to make it through the whole process.
Yeah, there no matter how bad off you were, it always seemed like there was always somebody worse. And they weren't complaining. They were going to their appointments, doing their thing. No one's griping, getting stuff done, just, going about life. And so I'll tell you one of the scariest things that happened in the hospital. I mean, the grafts and the scraping, that was the most painful. But one of the scariest things that happened is when I woke up out of the skin graft surgery. I went to lay on my side, and I'll just say I felt my junk move in a weird way. I'm like, I've never felt what is that? I lift the sheet up, they put a catheter in. Now, they asked me beforehand. They said, "Oh, you want a catheter?" No, I'll be able to walk. You're only taking skin off the surface of my thighs. Don't do it. They put one in. And I looked at that and like I would have rather been in a gunfight. I wasn't even that scared in a gunfight with Taliban as I was when I lifted that up and I saw this thing protruding out of my appendage between my legs. I'm like, I wanted to rip it out. I was kind of freaked. I didn't know it was there. It was just this really fast, but then I was afraid to pull it out because like, what if it messes it up? That's one organ you don't want to mess up. So they took it out, and oh my god, it hurt so bad. It was agonizing. But yeah, that was like the scariest part of being in the hospital, is waking up with a catheter in and not knowing they had put one in, and the shock of that. But there's worse things that happen to guys waking up with no legs and stuff like that, obviously. But that was interesting.
Or, from my time in Afghanistan, some of those guys waking up with no junk because we ended up having to wear Kevlar diapers and Kevlar underwear while I was on that deployment. So, yeah, no, I get it, man. So, over the course of your 14 months at Brook, I know there were physical and emotional challenges, and I can't fathom what it took for you to just surgery after surgery, knowing what's coming, right? So how did you deal with that, and what did get you through that process? And kind of talk about the things that you leaned on to get you through those very unpleasant experiences, because I can imagine, after the razor blade scraping and the cleaning out of the wounds and maybe your first skin graft, you're like, I don't want to do this again. You know what I mean? Like I can imagine what that feels like. I can't relate to your experience because I haven't had injuries like that, but I can relate in like a situational. I've been in situations where you're sick at your stomach. You just genuinely don't want to do something. And so I imagine you probably have those feelings. And so how do you get through that? And like, what did you lean on to get through those experiences?
I don't think I was even conscious of the fact I was doing it, but I did something I think not that we're taught in the military, but that we realize in the military. It's like one of those 25, 30 plus mile road marches. You're at like, you know, mile, I don't know, 15. And it's like, oh man, it's starting to break you down. And you're 15 or 20. And, you got that one guy who yells out, "Hey guys, only 14 more miles to go." And everyone's telling him to shut the F up. And it's like, we didn't need to hear that right now. It's like, hey, we only have this huge distance left. Or like, oh, we're only halfway done with this thing. It's like, oh, you just want to strangle the guy. It was kind of like that, because what you do in that situation is you look at the trees or terrain features or the next phone pole. You get to the next phone pole. Then when you get there, you look at the next one, you focus on getting there, and you sort of just inch your way through this mental battlefield, and you take the battlefield that way. And so, to your point, what you were saying about the hospital, everything that was uncomfortable, it's like, all right, there's a process here. They're going to have all these appointments, all these tests, all these things, all these procedures, all these. You just take one at a time, and you know that the hands of time will always continue to turn, and one day I will be out of this place. And I'm not thinking about, oh, it'll be 14 months or 12 or 9 months from now. I'm just focused on what's my next thing, what's my next thing, and you keep that short term vision. You know, my friend who Jay Redmond, who I talked about, and my other friend Chad Williams, he's a Navy SEAL. He talks about this in his speeches. When you're in BUDS Navy SEAL training, he says, you know, it gets so bad, and you're in that cold water, and you're so broken down. You know, it's hell week. He said, guys just have to remember, don't think about the end of Hell Week being 4 days away. He said, just make it to the next meal. Make it to the next meal. And in fact, they don't get many meals, I don't think, in Hell Week. So that might have just been prior to Hell Week. But make it to the next meal. Make it to the next appointment. Make it to the next phone call. Make it to the next doable thing. And don't think about how far you have to go. Like, you can look at that, but then stop focusing on it. Focus on the next immediate thing. And that's a strategy that has sustained me in life in a lot of ways. I mean, I do a lot of distance running now, even still. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I'm like, I'm not looking at how far I have to go. I'll get to the next, you know, marker, whatever. It's the same thing. So focusing on, I think, those short term victories and goalposts, so to speak, to get to, instead of trying to think on how long and how far you have to go and how big of a project something is.
Yeah, focusing on stacking small wins, right? That seems to be key. I've heard that. I've not had the pleasure of having a Navy SEAL on the show yet, but you know, listening to other people's podcasts and stuff, I've heard that before. Just make it to the next meal, make it to the next meal, and it's like when you start to chunk life down like that, man, things get a lot easier, don't they?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just like a mission. Break things down in the simplest form. What has to be done? What do you have to have? Who do we need? And get those things together, and then you move forward.
What was the most difficult part of the rehab process for you? And maybe I know it's been a long time, but like, you know, thinking back to then, what did you struggle with the most?
Well, physically, it was getting my hands back because they put, I'll say physically, and then I'll talk about the mental aspect. Physically, it was this hand because it has skin grafts, and they had to lay the skin graft over the fingers and knuckles too. And so, apparently, when a skin graft is put on, as it heals, it shrinks to about 1/3 its size, is what I was told. So my hand got really tight because it was healing and shrinking. It was over the knuckles. So I couldn't do more than this with my hand. I couldn't make a fist. My knuckles were like stuck. So I had to go to occupational and physical therapy for months. I would work on bending each knuckle a little bit every day, working it down to where I could finally make a fist again. That took several months, both hands. Now, so that was painful because I knew every day you know, I barely have knuckles on this hand. It's like flat from the skin graft, and I always knew with how tight this skin was. I knew this stuff is just going to burst open one of these times. It's gonna rip as I'm doing this occupational therapy, and it never did. Skin is extremely tough, and so that was sort of the physically most painful thing. I was also having headaches 1 to 3 times a day, from the concussions of both the blasts I sustained, and so as part of the TBI, where I was having headaches, terrible headaches every day. They would start at the back of my neck, go up my right side, occipital nerve, back of my head, and once they started, it was like lighting a fuse. It just got worse. Mentally, I'm going to preface it this way. I don't think I struggled in a lot of ways or as bad as some people probably think I would, given the situation I was in. Now, I'm not going to say I didn't struggle. I did. I had hypervigilance. I was always on alert. I got pissed off real easy, a lot. Very short fuse. I had a hard time remembering things. Attention span was really shot. Things like that. And then I would get frustrated and mad because I couldn't remember something, which would trigger a tension headache. And then after that, it's like it's this domino effect from hell. And so that was like a daily occurrence. So that was mentally one of the biggest problems is just learning what was going on with me because I'm in my own fog of war. I'm in my own head and not even realizing all the problems I had or not thinking they were as bad as doctors are making them out to be or the social worker was making them out to be. Um, when I asked my wife about it later, I said, was it really that bad? As like they said, and she's like, yeah, it was that bad, or worse. So I had a lot of that, just the hypervigilance, being mad a lot, just stuff like that. That was the mental side.
Traditional PTSD symptoms that we all really get from just any kind of time at war, really. Yeah, I relate to that so much, man, because, you know, I started my healing journey about 11 months ago, like actually healing, mentally and emotionally and all that. And I like you didn't realize like how short my fuse was and how all that stuff just kind of is connected, and it's a recipe for disaster. And we don't, you like you said, the fog of war, you're not able to see past that. You're just kind of in it. And I'm glad that you shared that with us. Did you have any kind of like motivation to get back to the fight, or kind of remorse, or I guess survivor's guilt about not being with your unit? And did any of that stuff kind of creep up for you, or not so much? You were more focused on taking care of yourself and healing?
Well, I was PCS from my unit to the medical center. So it was like doctors, they said, you need more time to heal. You need to stay here. We need to do more. And then they ended up medically retiring me out. So that was really out of my hands. Um, at the same time, there is a part of you that wants to go back with your unit. You never want to think the people you're with in a war zone are like one guy short and they're in danger. Like I mean, one guy can make a difference, even if it's a small difference. But I I knew after that first explosion we talked about, I started noticing that I was like, after a while, I was forgetting little things while we were planning missions. Whether it was like one time I forgot to grease the spray gun with the CLP, the little squirt bottle for the saw, the M249 saw, squad automatic, machine gun. Um, One of my guys had it, and the machine gun, and he was supposed to have that with him. While I was his team leader, he forgot the bottle of CLP. So we ended up launching an ambush from a mountaintop at about 6 in the morning as the Taliban were flushed out by a line company and ran straight into us and our snipers and our machine guns. And that son of a bitch jammed just like stereotypically does. You hear like, hey, the saw is a great machine gun until you need it. Flawlessly to the T of that stereotype. And it's like, great, where's the CLP? So I look at him, where's the CLP? And he's like, I'm like, what do you mean? So I'm like trying to like unjam the thing, and well, like I forgot that. Thankfully, it wasn't a real bad situation where like we were not in any danger, but we could have been at any point. And so there were little things like that. And I noticed my squad leader, he started getting on me more, and I thought, man, he's just guy's just being a dick. Maybe he's just stressed out. I think what was happening is I was missing little things and not realizing it. Because I knew my job, I knew what to do, spot checking everything and prepping for missions and recovery for missions. Like I knew that, but I think I was starting to miss things. So my point with that is that not going back and choosing to go with the medical out of the military, I was okay with that because I didn't want to stay in and then be in a war zone again and forget something, and then somebody gets hurt or dies because of something I forgot. Because one little thing you forget, that can turn the tide of a battle. I mean, if there'd have been more Taliban out there from a different position we didn't know about, that machine gun going down, that could have been really bad for us. Because that machine gun, can be a game changer in a gunfight. And so I didn't want that happening, and so I was okay with getting out.
Yeah, I relate to that so much, man. I think back over, the course of 3 to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, all the things that I experienced, and, hearing you talk about it as a leader, PCCAs, PCIs, right? There Now that I think about it, there was a lot of things that I was missing and no explanation for them because, my shit was tight. I made sure of that. I know what war is about, right? Like I'm doing this basically every other year for my career, and it's those quote unquote invisible injuries that A were ignored, or B not addressed, or C just generally we didn't know enough about, right? And so it's cool to right, and that's so not the case, as we are obviously learning 20 years later, 20 years of war. um so, we've reached a part of the show where we talk about the transition, and I think your transition may look a lot different than a lot of the veterans that I've had on here, the veteran entrepreneurs that I've had on here, and their transition. So your transition was probably primarily really just getting out of the hospital and then going home. I assume that's kind of how it worked for you. Did you get out from the hospital and then you went into civilian life? And if that is the case, talk about, I call it the transition hole, because there's varying levels that we as veterans fall into, and the further down that hole you go, the harder it gets to climb out of that hole. And I think this is an important part of the show, because this is where we need to get in front of veterans and show them that you're not alone in this transition hole, and that there is ways to get out of this hole and move forward and live a fulfilling, joyful life that is on your terms. And so I'm curious to hear about your transition, the struggles that you dealt with in the transition. Did that look like substance abuse? Did that look like, just compartmentalizing everything until you explode? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I did have a different exit out of the military due to the extent of my injuries. What I didn't know is that there's a thing called medical retirement. Like I was, the disability rating from the army due to my cumulative injuries was so high. They're like, well, you're above this certain percentage. We're medically retiring you out. So that came with some benefits. They, and this is right around the same time that the whole Walter Reed stuff went down. And so, like, they streamlined me into the VA. Just, I mean, like a white glove, because all political eyes were on. After Walter Reed, they're looking at Bethesda, Balboa, Bamsey, and everyone's going, if Walter Reed was that bad, let's look at all these other military bases. So all the command was like,
So I'm not familiar with the Walter Reed incident. What happened with Walter Reed? Because I mean, so this is '06. I'm in the middle of a
yeah, this was around '07, I think it
yeah.
happened.
So I'm starting my 16-month deployment at that point. So I'm not plugged into any kind of news or anything like that. I'm fighting the fight in Iraq. So please, if you don't mind, if I don't know about it, I'm sure others may know about it, but probably the majority of people don't. So can you call a little bit of light to that?
Yeah, I don't know everything about it, but basically, because I was going through my own stuff mentally, my understanding was like that it was like the living conditions in the barracks were basically unlivable. There was problems with that were harmful, and then it was just a big thing that just blew up in the news. It went nationwide, like I mean like a bomb. And after that happened, all eyes were on there. I think somebody had committed suicide. I don't know. I thought that happened. I don't recall. Don't quote me on that. But it was a really bad time. So everyone's eyes were on that. And this was in 2007 ish. So I mean, this is back when like everyone was like actively like, we love the military. We love the military. We're gonna do everything we can, and everyone cares about every little thing. All civilians, and there's all these organizations rising up, and it's like then that happens, and everyone's like, "What is going on? Our warriors deserve better," and so all that was happening. And then political eyes were looking at the other big medical centers, including the one I was basically ETSing from, getting out of the military. And so my transition, I had a VA rating, and everything was done by the time I got out. So it was very streamlined. That is not like the case with a lot of guys who don't get medically put out. The ETS after your time, like my brother getting out of the Marine Corps. He got out, and you just all right. It's like, well, you should probably take a resume writing class and some other bullshit class they're like you should take. And my understanding from him telling me is that you just gotta figure stuff out. It's like, here, you're back on the street kind of thing. And so, he went up and down a little bit, but he sustained, went up, had some struggles, kept going. It's like you just deal with stuff. And now he's very much on top of the world with his career. And so, but he had a lot rockier of an exit out of the military than I did because of my injury. So it's not like, wow, you're so lucky, Brian. Well, I wasn't, but like that made the exit out of the military a little smoother, especially during the time it was. But the thing that made the difference, this is the thing that made the difference. While I was at the medical center, a guy who's a Vietnam vet named Dave Reaver came to the medical center. He was injured in Vietnam. He had a phosphorus grenade. He was thrown off a riverboat into some brush, burnout brush at a bunker. Well, the story goes that a sniper shot him in the hand, aiming for his head, pierced his hand, pierced the grenade, blew it like 3 inches from his ear, burned half his body off. He was at Brook Army Medical Center back in 1969. Fast forward all these years, he comes in and he's speaking in the auditorium to me and like 30 other blown up, shot up guys, and telling his story, sharing his insights of how he moved forward, making fun of his story, making us all laugh hysterically. And this guy can't talk about pain without making you laugh hysterically. It's like it goes together. He's an incredible speaker, and he's written several books, and he became my mentor. He and I hit it off afterwards. He became my mentor and one of my best friends. And he basically said, Brian, if you want, I don't know what you have going after the Army, but I can show you how to do something with all this. I can show you how to do what I do. I can show you how to use your story in a way that is, you share your story, but you can talk about the lessons that you learn that were helpful. You can use it in a productive way to make a difference in the world. And so he took me under his wing. I went to work for his company after I left the military, and he basically took me on the road almost weekly for like an entire year after getting out of the military. Put me on stages for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. And this guy's booked, 75 to 100 times a year. So he's put me on a stage 2 or 3 minutes, take 2 or 3 minutes. And every time I spoke, I got a little bit better at speaking. But every time I spoke, I also healed a little bit mentally. And I remember him telling me, he said, Brian, every time you get up and tell your story, you get a little bit better. I thought he was talking about speaking, and he was, but he was talking about up here. He was talking about in here. I was healing inch by inch by inch by inch, 2 minutes at a time on these stages. And by the end of that year, I'd already started booking my own events. I was getting my full speech together. And this is a guy who'd been speaking for 35, 40 years at that point, successfully. He's massively successful. And so I thought, if I can just do like 10% of what this guy's done with his life, very successful. He's built different companies. He was married to the same woman for over 50 years. This guy held it together, moved forward, and made something of his life. He didn't stay where he was, which is where I was. So I knew, okay, this guy can show me a way out, like career-wise. But I spent a lot of time with him on the road, on the ranch out in Colorado, where his organization owns it. And he and I had a lot of time to just talk and whatever. He was like the father I never had. And he helped me not just move forward productively in life, but work through the things mentally, because he had to work through a lot of those too. And so we all get hurt in different ways, but there's only a finite number of issues that we all deal with as human beings from experiencing trauma. So you can't say, well, you haven't gone through the thing I went through. You don't get it. You can't help me. I used to think that way. Then I realized it's stupid, because I learned a lesson in combat called close air support. And when we were in the mountains of Afghanistan, we very often had A-10s, B-52s, Apache gunships that would serve as close air support. Here's the thing. On a battlefield, if you're in a warplane or a war helicopter, you have a very different view and perspective on that battlefield than the infantry guy like me on the ground. I can only see what I can see in front of me. That plane at 20,000 feet, or that bird at 2,000 feet, or that A-10 at 5,000 feet, wherever, they can see my whole battlefield from a vantage point. They can see things on my battlefield that I can't see. Now, if they wanted to chime in and say, hey, don't go over that ridge, there's like 200 Taliban over there. Well, we can't see it. Or if we get into something and we're like, hey, call in air support. Can you imagine a leader who would say, no, we're not calling in air support? We don't want the commander to think we can't handle ourselves in battle. We're not going to call in the air support. Stupid. If the enemy didn't kill you, your own guys would. And if you survive that, you get back to base, you'd probably get relieved of your duty. So it's the same thing with asking for help. We're always taught, don't ask for help. Though I be the lone survivor, like get through it. Don't ask. The thing is, that serves its purpose in that environment. Like that mentality, it really serves a good purpose. But when you come home, you have to realize that if you're going to counseling or if you're talking to people, you're going to these retreats, only stupid people don't call in air support when you're on a battlefield and you're getting ambushed. It's there. Who wouldn't call it in? Well, think of the help you're getting. If you're going out for help, whatever way you're doing it, think of it as air support, because only stupid leaders don't call in air support. So don't be the stupid guy who's not calling in for help when you know you need it. Because here's the thing, when you don't call it in long enough, eventually, a lot of times, things blow up anyway. And then the whole world sees what happened. And now they know what you didn't want them to know to begin with, because you just exploded in the middle of a crowd. You just like mentally let loose and maybe just said or started yelling or whatever, however it manifested itself. And everyone's standing around going, what is wrong with that guy? Oh, he's a veteran. And then it's like, oh, thanks. Now we all look like, assholes. But like, you have to be able to recognize and be willing to have the air support in your life. And this is all the same stuff that we did in the military. But air support is no longer an A-10 Warthog. It's maybe a counselor, a therapist, or a buddy who sits around the fire at the campfire with you, and you're willing to talk to them. I mean, it takes on all these different, these manifestations of these different things. But the military taught us everything we need to know to survive and win the battles. The problem is nobody teaches us how to integrate those lessons into civilian life.
I love that, man. And if you don't mind, I'm going to start using that analogy when I talk to people, because I've never heard it put quite like that, but boy, is that is the perfect analogy for that. You know what I mean? Like, they do have a 20,000 foot view of the battlefield, and you'd be a fool to never listen to your air support. And, it's also, having said that, like, it's really cool to see that you went through a transition with someone who realized what that transition could be like for you and what it should be like for you. And like, what your brother went through is what most of us go through. It's a shitty TAPS class. Now I think it's called something else. For me, I'm 100% VA side and 30% Army side. So I was retired too. However, I still had to scramble around because it took 90 days for any of that money to kick in, right? I don't know what I don't know about civilian life, because I was 17 when I joined. And the resume class is shitty. They tell you use your GI Bill, and you really are on your own. And, this show was born out of that need to really show veterans like there's a better way, and you don't necessarily have to be lost and stuck in that identity when you get out. There are people out here to help guide you. I really created this with the idea of, I want to be a guy that I didn't have when I got out. And it fills my heart to hear that, this Vietnam vet who is a successful speaker, who happened to be at your hospital and inspire you and then take you under his wing and mentor you, helped you avoid a lot of that transition hole that we all fall into. And I think
I
that's
was so
amazing.
fortunate. Yeah, I was so fortunate. And my point in life right now is it's like, you know, Dave Reaver was the guy who made the difference for me. He was the guy that made the difference. And like, my mission, like with like my Use Your Story program, for example, is to be a Dave Reaver to not just one other person, but thousands of other people who have stories, and to help, multiply what he taught me how to do and what he did. It's a force multiplication program, really.
And that's what I want to be for people. I want people to say, I listened to the Strategic Veteran podcast when he had Brian Fleming on, and they both said the same thing, and they both have the same mission. And I want to be like that. I want to help others. I want to just be better for myself. That's amazing, man. So obviously getting hooked up with Dave Reaver is what led you to creating your business, the useyourstory.com, and teaching people how to speak publicly. And,
Well,
and
and I'll
I
say
want to
this.
pick your,
I'll say this real quick. This is a recent program. The past couple of years, I spoke as an itinerant traveling keynote speaker for all kinds of companies and organizations, from Fortune 500 companies to all the rest, all over America, a few international. I've been doing that for over 16 years successfully. And now I'm creating this program based on how I learned how to taking what Dave taught me, taking the business stuff, a lot of stuff I learned, from other people and places. And that's what I'm condensing into this, marrying those, few key elements. So like what I teach, what my purpose is, it's it's born out of 16 years of real life experience in the trenches of business and getting rejected and things not working out and having to balance budgets and money and all the things that go into running a business. Meanwhile, at the same time, I can't remember what I had for breakfast 5 minutes ago because most of that time my head injury was so bad, my short-term memory was so bad. I mean, all this stuff, just all this, but like that's where this was born out of, and that's what I'm now doing.
Got it. I do want to pick your brain on the speaking aspect of it, because you said that Dave said this is how we're going to get you right, right? Like take care of you, and really, it's the catharticism in actually telling your story and talking about the things that most of us try to bury and forget and compartmentalize and put in that box that's never to be opened, that inevitably is going to be opened at the most inconvenient time ever. And so, do you think that's what using your story and speaking did for you? Is it really just, it's almost, it's cliche to say, but talk therapy, right? Like talking
Yeah.
about the shit, talking
Well,
about whatever
think
trauma
about it.
you dealt with.
The arts, whether it's visual art, songwriting, book writing, journaling, speaking, these various types of art forms that we have as human beings, how we create art, are some of the most healing things that can happen. And I equate the speaking to like a big tank of air. And every time I got on stage and spoke, that release valve on that tank got turned. It didn't let all the air out. It just let a little bit out at a time. Frequently, semi frequently, let it out a little bit at a time. Because if you don't do, that's what keeps it stable. And if you don't do that, a lot of times the whole thing combusts and it just explodes because there's too much in it. So that's like, I would say that was mentally for me. It was like a decompression. It was a release valve. In my book Redeployed, we talk about that, about finding your release valves, like what works for you. For me, it's running. It's like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. It's motorcycle riding. It's speaking. It's I didn't know I was a creative person. I got into this, and it's like I love writing these speeches. I loved writing the books. Like I found I discovered I had a creative side I never even knew, and it turned. And I'm not the best in the world, but I'm pretty damn good at what I do, and that's not arrogantly saying that. I'm pretty good at creating with words. I'm if I'm an artist of any kind, I'm a word artist. Like I was doing. Do you know what copy? Yeah, do you know what copywriting is? Like writing
Yeah,
headlines
of
that
course.
okay,
Yeah.
convince people to buy things. I was doing that for fun. And then someone's like, "Man, that's really good." This lady was like, I was at this conference and she's like, you can make about 100 grand a year copywriting. I'm like, "What's copywriting? Is that like so people can't like steal your idea or something?" She goes, "No, not copyright like 2008. No, copywriting, like you're writing. It's like writing ad headlines and words that convince people to take action and persuade them to do things." And I was doing it for fun. I didn't know it was an actual thing, or even that people did it for money. But it definitely complemented my speaking and my writing. And so I had this creative outlet the whole time. Part of the time, I didn't know it was a thing. I just knew I enjoyed it, and so I would sit for hours and just write stuff. And the other times, I'm out speaking, And when I was speaking, I was finding that people would talk to me afterwards and they'd say, hey, I didn't get blown up or go to Afghanistan, but man, I went through this thing or that thing, or this person died, or I had this trauma or this tragedy. And they go, but if you can get through all that, you know, uh, I can probably get through this. And I remember the first time that happened. I'll tell you a quick story here. This was what I'm about to tell you was the absolute turning point in my life. And it was only about 6 or 7 months after the injury. So I'd met Dave March 15th, 2007. That was about 5 months in at the hospital. And he invited me to come speak at one of his or to not speak, to attend one of his patriotic rallies in Manhattan, Kansas, right outside Fort Riley. And so I thought, well, okay, you're inviting me. I don't have much money for a plane ticket. He goes, don't worry, we cover it all. You can go for free. I said, all right. Well, I grew up poor. Free is good. You offer me something free, I'm taking it, and I will. And I took him up on it
every time. Every time.
And so I'm at this event. It's this auditorium, and I'm in the front row. I didn't realize how many people are filing in, but he's about halfway through his talk, and I hadn't really turned around. Well, he called me up on stage. He looked right down at me and pointed at me in the front row, like halfway through his talk, and he goes, Brian, come on up here. Tell him about yourself. And he hands me the microphone. He says, take 2 minutes. And I have the mic. I turn toward the audience. There were 3,000 people that had filled into this auditorium. Standing room only. It's like, wow, did you have butterflies? People ask. I'm like, there wasn't time. It's like getting an ice ball in the face from 5 feet away. Like, you just roll with it. And so I probably said something like, hey, I'm Brian. I got blown up. Here's what happened. I guess I'm still here for a reason. Like, go for it. I don't know. It was probably the worst motivational speech ever. But what happened when I stepped off stage changed the course of my life. It was a 1-degree shift that changed the course of my life. It changed my family tree. And here's what I mean. I stepped off stage and I'm shaking a few hands with some people. They're like, hey, thanks for getting up there and being willing to talk. We know that, my face was still pink from the burns. I had compression garments on my hands from the burn therapy. I was still very much in this fight of recovery when I spoke the first time. And this lady walked up to me. She was probably 23, 24, around my age at the time. And she just says this exact thing to me. She goes, didn't even tell me her name. She goes, hey, Brian, when I was growing up, I was raped and molested by family members all throughout my childhood, all throughout my teenage years. She said, my boyfriend was abusive. He just broke up with me recently. And 2 weeks ago, I tried to kill myself, but I failed. Whatever she did, it didn't work. And then she just stopped for a minute. And I'm thinking, I am so sorry. Like, what do you say to somebody like that? Like, what, like that just, they just give you that. I didn't know what to say, and she goes, but you know what? This is what she topped it off with. She goes, if you can get through all that, talking about Afghanistan, the injury, she goes, I think I can get through what I'm going through. She goes, I think I can get through what I'm going through if you can get through that. And right there, something changed in me. Something came out of me I didn't know was in me. And it was like a 1-degree shift. But like with land navigation, you go 10 feet, 1 degree off doesn't make any difference. You go 100 miles, you end up in a completely different destination. But it wasn't a bad thing, it was a good thing. I didn't have any advice for her. I didn't know what to say. She simply saw me, how I had survived, and inspired her. Just the fact that I didn't die, to keep going and fighting her own battle to win and not to kill herself. And I thought, she's not going to go home and drink a bottle of pills or put a pistol in her mouth tonight. And people over the years have asked me, they said, Brian, like, what's that one thing, that helped you get through everything? Like, everyone thinks there's like this magic pill. It was a lot of things, but this thing was major. And here was my problem. For about 9 years, I didn't know how to tell people why I was always so hopeful and why I was so mission driven. I didn't understand it, but I got addicted from that point to going out, sharing my story, but not just sharing my story to talk about myself. People misinterpret that. I was sharing that, but I was sharing the lessons I learned as it applies to their lives so they can win the battles they're facing. I wasn't projecting my story, I was using my story. And what ended up happening is I read this book called Man's Search for Meaning, probably 8 or 9 years after all this happened, by Viktor Frankl. He's a Holocaust survivor, he's a psychiatrist, lost his whole family in the Nazi prison camps. He was in a few of them himself. And in that book, he said in one sentence, Adam, one sentence, he said what that transformation was that happened inside me that has been the fuel to the fire in me for what I do for the past almost 17 years now. And here's what he said. He's talking about the problem of suffering. He said in some ways suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And I'll say that again. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. In that moment, when that young lady came up, told me what happened, and she's not going to kill herself, she has hope, I discovered a very small sense of meaning in all that suffering I've been going through, from the war to the injury, the recovery. Suddenly, there was like a mission or like a meaning behind it. Like, I need to go find more people like her. That felt really good. And maybe there's other people who are about to pull the trigger on themselves tonight. Like, so I told Dave, I'm like, I don't know what happened today, but I have to keep doing this. And he said, don't worry, I'll show you how to do it. You know, that was the thing that turned my life around. And while real quick, while we're on the topic of it, despair. People kill themselves very often when they're in a state of despair. And basically, the textbook definition of despair is more or less a complete loss of hope. No hope, zero. They're like, you're never, ever getting out of this. Viktor Frankl, he had his own definition of despair. He said despair is suffering without meaning. Suffering without meaning. So you're suffering, you're going through something, it's painful, but you really don't see any reason for it. It's not for a cause you believe in. If you're suffering for your religion or you're suffering for your country, like, that's a meaning. But if you're just suffering and there seems to be no rhyme or reason about it, that, he said, is his own definition of despair. So one of the greatest things that happened with me because of all this is I discovered very early on after my injury a sense of meaning in my suffering, and I didn't even realize it until years later. That's been like the one key that set me in the right direction. Even though there were speed bumps, that was the thing.
That's amazing, man. And I think maybe that kind of sheds some light on what we were talking about before we started today recording here. Is I feel very called to get into public speaking for one reason or another. And it's through the work I've been doing, building on LinkedIn, building the strategic veteran, talking with other veterans, coaching, showing them that they have what it takes to be an entrepreneur, but then them coming back to me and like excited because I unlocked something for them. And it's like, all I had to do was share all the struggles and all the shit that I went through, to show you, like, you don't have to walk the same path I do. And to me, it's the coolest feeling in the world, like you said, to just have that kind of impact on somebody's life, to just kind of just have a little bit of I don't know, responsibility in changing their position in life, if you will. And I think that's amazing. And thanks for sharing that, because it sheds a little bit of light on what I feel like I'm being called to do right now, and obviously gives us insight into why you do what you do. So let's talk about, what were the challenges when you decided you needed to keep doing this after that 2-minute speech where you didn't have time to be nervous, but you probably were in amazement that you're like, holy shit, that just happened, right? Like, that just happened. And so what were the challenges with you building the speaking career, the coaching career, the authoring, and then ultimately landing on Use Your Story?
Yeah, well, the first thing was it was my question to Dave, like, how do I do this? How does one start something like this? How do you launch it? What do you need to do? What do you it was all those questions that everybody has. And when I created Use Your Story, I basically just looked back at every question I asked in the beginning and I'm like, all right, that's probably a good place to start. But I was also talking to other people who were wanting to do it. And they were pretty much saying the same thing. So I'm like, okay, killer premise to launch this on, because I know it's my experience, and I've checked with the marketplace, and they're telling me the same thing. And so it was really, here's what Dave did for me. Dave, through example and occasional advice, the constant example I saw was the big thing, and then occasional tips. Hey, maybe say this that way, or maybe do this that way. Uh, I learned how to persuade and influence people at a heart and soul level from a podium. I learned how to tell a story in a way that not only inspires people but makes them emotional, and they'll experience the full spectrum of emotion, and then to bring them back up and leave them with hope. And here's what we're doing, be a part of it, or apply this to your life, go get this resource, it's going to help you do this thing that you're dealing with. And people walking away going like like wow, like, I mean, I've done it so much, that at one point I was giving my 45-minute keynote speech without notes, with a brain injury so bad that I couldn't remember what I had for breakfast 5 minutes after eating it before leaving the breakfast table. That's how many times I've given that keynote speech, how to stand firm when everything around you is blowing up. I've been giving that thing for a decade and a half. And so that was that, learning how to craft a speech in a compelling way that moves and influences people to a better place that they can be in than where they are now. I learned so much of that from watching Dave. So now he had a scheduler. So he had somebody who was booking all his events. He has, a big organization. He wasn't booking his own events. And so sometimes I'd be like, Dave, how can I book more gigs? He's like, just keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, I'm trying, but how do I'll go talk to Louise. That was his scheduler, and she'd been with him for like 30 years, booking him out like 100 times a year. And so I had to learn the business side. And here's what happened. The first couple of years, I had quite a few events, man. And, I mean, the pay scale and speaking, this is strictly business, by the way. This isn't like purpose, passion. This is business, because money is the grease on the machine that makes everything possible. If you're too modest about making money or a ton of money with your cause or sharing your story, you might as well not even start, because there are people you're going to meet because you made the money to make that possible, to go to where they are and share with them, and to create the programs you do that are going to help them. So I had to learn business. I had to learn marketing, and with speaking in particular. The first couple of years, people were like, "Hey, we got $2,500. Can you come speak for a half hour?" And I'm all like, "Well, let me pray about it. Amen. I'll be there. Where do you want me to be at what time?" And then, I mean, the speaking fees that you can get are absolutely insane. I mean, I was making that amount getting shot at and blown up monthly in Afghanistan. All right, and they're like, "Wait, 30 minutes to come give a speech?" And that's on the small end. I mean, it's gotten way bigger, like into the five figures. But that's
Yeah, I've
building
heard
over.
$25,000 for 30 minutes at some points. Some places will pay
It,
$25,000 for you
it
to give a
depends
half
on
hour speech.
it depends on the organization, their budget, and what the situation is. But there's a lot of money in speaking if you know how to access it. And so my point with this is, people are saying, just come tell your story, come tell your story, and they're throwing checks at me. So I'm like, okay, like, who wouldn't? Well, I was more just kind of telling my story, but I hadn't structured my speech properly. There's a right there's a few different ways to structure a speech based on what the purpose of this speech is. All right. And so, like, and with a keynote speech, there's a handful of ways to do it, but there are some key components that we don't have time to go into now, but you want to make sure you have those in there, and sometimes in certain orders, because it's a best practice for a really effective speech. I had to learn how to craft a compelling speech that moved people to take a particular predetermined desired action I wanted them to take. And it could have been something that would make their life better. If I'm speaking of the military, speaking on marriage to the military, to them and their spouses, do this exercise with your spouse tonight. or if it's go buy my book, or it's, hey, I'm speaking now. Tell your friends. I'll let her come speak for them. Different things. But I had to learn how to structure my speech where my story is about 10% of my whole speech. It used to be like 90% because they're like, come tell your story. I'm like, okay. And they're like, here's money. I'm like, hey, I grew up poor. You're going to offer me checks. I'll take them. So it's like, yeah, I'll talk to your dog, man. You're going to pay me something. But I had to learn that what I wasn't doing, and what I quickly pivoted on after about 3 or 4 years, was structuring my story from a position of value in the marketplace. All right. So basically, I had to look and say, like, what problem are people already booking and paying speakers for, and hiring speakers to come speak? What problems are people doing that with? And which one of those is most relevant to me that I can attach my story to? So I can fly into that radar and go, hey, I solved that problem, but I do it in this really unique way. And then I can explain it to them, and they go, "Oh my gosh!" And then oh, and you have the story about the suicide bomber who tried to kill you. Um, I don't have to have a crazy story like that. Most speakers don't have a crazy story like that, but it can help. But you can be even more successful than I've been at it without some crazy life story. But I had to position my story from a position of value that solved a problem. And this is business 101. This is marketing 101. So I had to pick, like, what problem can I solve for what group of people, and then spearhead that and be like the best solution I could be giving that speech. My speech is my product. Meeting planners are the customer. They got the money and power to book me to speak. And so they would book me to speak, and that allowed me to take that money, go back, and to be able to, pay my bills, raise my family. I have a wife and 2 kids. um, but also put that money back into business where I could start having people help me, and I could start continuing to spread that message and continue to write books. That takes a lot of work and a lot of money. I've been able to go places and speak for free where they wouldn't have been able to afford me if I didn't have the money freedom, the financial freedom to go do that anyway, because I wanted to. And so it was hearts and minds. I learned that from Dave. Speaking, presenting, so good. And then I had to learn the business side. And when I talk about the Use Your Story program, that's I start people at the very bottom, like baby steps up into this thing, because that's what I would have needed in the beginning. This is basically the program, uh, with the business aspect into it, which you absolutely have to have if you're going to share your story or do something with it. You have to think like a business owner, because that's the way the world grows. That's the way people think.
Yeah, I love that, man, because you're proving in speaking that you still have to have an ICP, you still have to have a UVP or unique value proposition, right? You have to market yourself. You were already interested in copywriting and didn't even know what the hell it was, which I think is hilarious because I hate copywriting. I'm not a writer. I don't enjoy it. But also it's one of those things that's very necessary. And so it's really cool to see that, like, those same fundamental things about business in picking a problem or an ICP's pain points and solving that problem for them using your story and your speaking, right? Marketing yourself. It all applies no matter what business you want to be in. And I think that's really cool that you've now created a program that really walks people from day one of what you need to do all the way to if they want to be more successful than you. Not that you're not successful, but you've said a couple of times here, there are people that are way better at this than you, and and I think that's awesome, man. I think that's
Well,
really, really cool.
and here's what's important too, in case people are thinking, well, maybe Brian's just talking about the business, making money. It's all about that. No, money's the grease on the machine that makes the world go around and makes things possible. And I want you to think about this too. A lot of people I trained, they have used their story to help, for example, create causes to prevent what happened to them from happening to other people, or to facilitate healing journeys or programs that helped them. Now they want to reach back out and help other people. How do you raise money for a nonprofit? You give an absolutely killer speech that is geared towards the end of the thing, builds up the boiling water where people want to pull out their wallets, their checkbooks, and give that organization money so they can help veterans like us or whoever they're helping. I mean, I can literally use my story for, countless causes, mental health programs, veterans programs. I can do it for a number of things. And I have a lot of friends who have nonprofits and they've used their story as the basis to launch into speaking to raise money for that cause. So it's not just lining your pockets. I know our veteran community gets really weird sometimes, but it's not all veterans, but people say, they're just in it for the money. It's like, dude, did you make as little as I did in the military getting shot at and blown up? Like, you should go out and make as much money as you can. And if you're providing value, you're doing a good thing in the world, I hope you make millions. And I hope you have fun with it. I hope you do right with it. And I hope you donate a bunch of money to causes that matter or start a cause and you can use your speech, your story through a speech form to make that cause possible.
I agree with that, man. I think that I can't really top that, but I think you might agree with this. Money can't be your why, right?
No,
Money is
no.
not your why.
It's a
You've said
byproduct of
several
providing
times.
value.
Exactly, right? And I think that's where, those veterans get confused. First of all, they think that we're full of shit with the amount of money that there is to be made out there, whether that's digital entrepreneurship through, a copywriting business or agency or a podcast or, any one of 100 other things, and the public speaking forum as well. And, you just alluded to it, like your product, you're getting paid to deliver a fucking amazing speech that gets these donors to open their wallets and fund these incredible programs, right? Like, I'm thinking about it from my perspective. I think why I'm being called to public speaking after having this conversation with you is July of last year, I got picked up by Heroic Hearts to go to Peru and do an ayahuasca retreat, and it changed my life. It changed my life in so many ways, and and now I can see a way forward because my whole mission, the reason I signed up for the Being True to You course to be a psychedelic integration and addiction recovery coach is to help more veterans, give them the tools to start their healing journey with or without plant medicine, but also to volunteer as a psychedelic integration coach with Heroic Hearts Project because they saved my life. And now I kind of see why I'm being called into public speaking. A, because it makes me uncomfortable, and I feel like I need to go do things to challenge myself that make me feel uncomfortable. But B, because like what you just said, Heroic Hearts is only able to do what they do based on donations, right? They're a nonprofit, so they can't reach every veteran, and it's a cause I believe in. So I would have an incredible time putting together a speech to get donors to open their wallets to fund that nonprofit that saved my life. And thank you so much for kind of giving me clarity on that. And that's what I love about doing this show with other veteran entrepreneurs is like there are so many ways you can make a difference. And none of the 20 or so people that I've interviewed and talked to on this show and the 6 that have been released already, not a single one of them's why has been money. And money is the byproduct that frees you and allows you to go and help more people. And you said you couldn't have written a book. It is a tool, and it's to be used as a tool. It's not to be the be all end all, right? And when you get that into your head and you start living by that, it's amazing what kind of starts to happen for you.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned your ayahuasca retreat. I love that because psychedelic assisted therapies are the number one thing that healed my mind in record time. That I should have been given that stuff the day I got out of the hospital, and it was like 13 years later because there was an organization called Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions. Marcus Capone, his Navy SEAL, him and his wife started it. Same thing for psychedelic therapies. I They sent me to a program to do 2 plant
Did you go
medicines.
do Ibogaine and 5-MeO?
Yes,
Yeah.
it
That's the
healed.
one I really wanted to do.
It healed decades of trauma in a matter of hours. and it's never, ever, ever come back. And I've done ayahuasca a few times, and it's like there's no. I don't want to get off on a tangent. There's no reason to have
No, this is great,
so
man.
many.
This is the stuff we should talk about.
There's no reason to have so many prescription meds for so not all, but so many guys like us. If we just would have had that when we came home, like I mean, the first half of my kids' lives, the first 10, 11, 12 years of their lives, they would have known the Brian Fleming, their dad, who he was pre-deployment. The peaceful, happy, loving guy who really didn't ever get mad. They got the war veteran Brian, who had to deal with shit and had pills thrown at him that didn't work and all kinds of things that nothing ever really, for me, none of that stuff ever really worked. I get the psychedelic assisted therapy. I mean, it's like I began
15 years of therapy in a night.
Yeah, and the thing is, it it literally just took away the trauma for me. Like this stuff sounds too good to be true. People don't even believe it because it sounds like it's too good to be true. And it might not be this way for everybody, but there are so many guys like us who have the same exact story. They go decades of struggle and it was gone in like a few hours. Ibogaine was I laid on the floor for 13 and a half hours on Ibogaine, and the DMT, that was a 12-minute journey that literally showed me the source of all my suffering. And then I released it, and I've never dealt with it since. It's just gone. It's been almost 3 years since I did that. It's insane. Uh, what's possible? I'm sorry. I'm going on a tangent. I'm so glad
No,
to hear you
man,
did
this is
ayahuasca.
and this is
Beautiful.
great, brother, because I'm a testament to that too. I did it in July 7th. My trip ended last year, so we're at 11 months. Actually, tomorrow since I did that. In 11 months, I've lost 93 pounds. I started the Strategic Veteran. I've built a following on LinkedIn. I haven't doom scrolled. I barely watch TV. If I do watch TV, it's to watch other podcasters to learn how to get better at what I'm doing. I'm pursuing serving other people. Like I genuinely, all I want to do in my life for the rest of my life is just help people improve their position in life. I didn't used to be like that. I used to not want to talk to people. I didn't want to. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir with you, and the audience has heard this several times from me, but I'm a believer, brother, and there's a reason I paid a lot of money to get the Being True to You certification, not just to be a coach for Heroic Hearts and not just to make a little bit of money on the side if I choose to go that route, but really to keep giving me the integration tools that I didn't know I needed, because it's so important. And I'm not here to say that plant medicine is for everybody. I'm not here to say that your experience with plant medicine will be the same as mine. But I am here to say that when done in a ceremonial setting with the right intentions and an integration plan and process, it can work to heal so much for so many people. And I believe that, and I will never stop believing that, and I will never stop being an advocate for that.
Oh, and you want to hear this? When I got home from that trip, from that ceremony, my mother, she saw the difference so great in me the day I got home because she lived about 20 minutes away from me at the time. She signed up, she paid her own way, and she went through the program that I went through. And she had decades of abuse and trauma from 2 past marriages, and one of which was to my father. And then after that, my wife, who was sexually assaulted, raped, molested as a child from the age of like 4 by family members, all that trauma, all that trauma. She didn't even want to go outside. She was afraid to walk through a grocery store parking lot during the day. And if a guy would look at her because she's pretty, if he looked at her, she'd just be on high alert. Like, what are you looking at me for? Stop looking at me. I mean, it was this trauma over years and years. I sent her down through that program. 8 hours in Ibogaine, the trauma's gone. DMT, it caused her to love herself in a way she didn't know existed. It's been 2 years since she did that. Her trauma went away in the 8 hour thing and the 12 minutes on both of those plant medicines. It's going it's going on 3 years now in November. It's never come back. The trauma is gone. She's like literally reborn. She's like the pre-traumatized version of herself. It's like it's her, just without the shadow and the blindness and the fog of that trauma. And she's I mean, she's alive.
Yeah, man, I relate to that so much. I look at the pictures. I absolutely, and I want to kind of keep having this conversation if you're willing to have it, because I do believe this is valuable. And I they made us take a picture, just a selfie against a wall, at the first day of the retreat, and then after your last ceremony, they make you take another picture, and it's really just for you. But I used an app called Pick Stitch, and I put them together side by side. And Brian, I'm telling you, the whites of my eyes were wider. The gray in my beard was far less, if not gone, at the time. I mean, obviously there's some gray there now. I'm almost 40, but my attitude, I really felt reborn. And I think that's the best word for it, because looking back at the pictures of 311-pound Adam from July last year, I don't know that person. That person doesn't exist anymore. That person is completely gone. None of him survived that event. And I think maybe you can speak to this. Did psychedelics and your experience with ibogaine and 5-MeO? I've not done those. I've just done ayahuasca and a 3-night ceremony. I participate in things like fasting, mindfulness, meditation, yoga after the retreat. But did you feel like you were, I don't know, my experience with it was I was out of balance. And what I mean by that is the medicine showed me that everything is balanced between light and dark in the world. You can see it all around you. I see it on your shirt right now. I see it on the wall with the red light behind you, the blue and the white on your mic flag, right? Um, I was way out of balance. I was consumed with darkness, is how I felt. And immediately after the first ceremony, where I purged all of that bad energy out of me, and it's literally, you can see this leaving you. I don't know how else to explain it, but I immediately felt 1,000,000 pounds lighter, and like I could breathe again, and like everything was right in the world. And basically now for me, what I learned from the medicine is life is about balance, not too high, not too low, that perfect sine wave, if you will. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. The way I equate it, the way I say it, it's like I felt like I I had been breathing at 40% of my body's capacity my whole life, and I just didn't know any different. I thought that was 100%. And after this stuff, which is so healing, I was up to like 90, 95%. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know I could breathe this good. I never knew this existed. I didn't know it could be that good. And, some people are for these psychedelic plant medicines. There's a right way to do them in the right setting, like you said, with the proper people. There's nothing uh, evil about them. They're not bad for you. Like most of them, you can't die on or anything like that. There's some of them, if you do it wrong, it can have effects like ibogaine, for example. But like the programs I go through, they were medically monitored by professionals, medical professionals who are trained in this stuff, and they monitor. And it's crazy how sometimes I hear people say things. I had a friend of mine, and he's a great guy, but he told me it's like from the devil, basically. And I was like, okay, I respect your opinion. Um, is the devil now in the healing business? Is that what you're saying? Because I mean, I prayed for years for some stuff to go away, didn't go away, and I'm not getting into that saying whose God works what way and doesn't. But this stuff, it can be an amazing. I've had only amazing, like mind blowing heavenly experiences on this stuff. Some people are like, man, I went straight to hell, and but when they came out of it, they're like, I'm so free. Like I had to. It went to the source of my suffering, and they had to sort of face it. It showed them like what was causing their pain, and by seeing that and being able to deal with it, they're now free from it, and you can see it in their life.
100%. I did a 3-night ceremony. The first night I did, man, I blasted off straight to hell. I've never been so terrified in my life. This evil, vindictive laugh kept coming out of me, which is a form of purging for those who aren't familiar. Obviously, you do puke. It's not what people make it out to be. It's very much, they've made us fast. Yeah, and they made us fast from lunch until the ceremony. So you're usually not even taking the medicine till like 7 o'clock at night. The last time you ate is 11 o'clock. So what you're purging is, in my opinion, the bad energy, the stuff that you're out of balance on. It's really kind of like you don't have anything in your stomach. You're not even drinking water for like 7 hours before you do this. And but I met what I consider God through that experience. No question in my mind that there is a higher power. I look at that in the form of the universe. You can hate me or love me for that, whatever that is. Taught me balance, taught me that we're all connected. Everything is connected. Every action we take, everything that we do has rippling effects throughout the universe. And very much what you put into this universe is what you get out of this universe. And you're never going to change my mind on this. I have to be careful, because when I hear those naysayers or those people like what you were explaining talk about, oh, that's from the devil, and it's like you're speaking out of turn about something that you have zero idea about, and it doesn't serve me to get angry or to have those thoughts. I just try to hold space for people and realize now that is part of their journey. Everyone is on their own independent journey, and it's not for me to interfere with it. The universe puts us in each other's paths at different points in our lives. There's a reason you and I are sitting here having this conversation, and it wasn't until almost 2 hours in that we got to the plant medicine stuff, which we really have in common, and all the benefits from that. But there's the universe has this way of working to put us in front of the people that we're supposed to be in front of at the time we're supposed to be in front of them. And there is some kind of difference that you are making in their lives, or they are making in your lives. You just have to open your eyes and be able to see the clues that the universe is leaving for you.
Well, I'm going to say this about like the truth of this stuff. People can believe it or not or have their opinion, but here's the thing. Like the old phrase goes, a tree is known by its fruit. When you have these natural plant medicines that grow out of the ground, we didn't do it. They were here before we were, and they'll be here after us probably. They have the ability to produce these favorable, massively healing outcomes on a scale that is just, it feels immeasurable. A tree is known by its fruit. I've been healed through this stuff. My wife has. My mother has. I have about 200 or 300 friends who are veterans who have gone through the same program. We all have the same story. You have the same story. A tree is, you don't have to agree with anything. Maybe it's not for you. That's fine. It's totally fine. But a tree is known by its fruit. And the fruit that's coming from these healing plant medicines, it's I mean, it's above and beyond healing and positive. In fact, Stanford this past year did a study with the program I went through. Was a part of that, and I don't want to misquote them, but the vets organization, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, they have, I think it's on their website, but it was a Stanford study based on the effectiveness of ibogaine for the treatment of post traumatic stress in combat veterans post 9/11. And it was something like, yeah, it was something like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was something like an 80% like decrease over like 12 months in PTSD, or something ridiculous like that. This is a Stanford study.
It was like I think 78%. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. And so talking about that in this study, it's more than just that, right? Like for me, it was, now I actually care. Like my body craves certain foods. I've learned how to listen to what I'm putting into my body and how my body reacts to that, right? A prime example, I don't drink ice water anymore. I drink room temperature water, because if you think about the evolution of humans and like what our ancestors would have had access to, when the fuck did we ever get access to cold water? Right? Like, I participate in fasting, which has been one of the biggest changes I've made in my life. And I feel like I'm 20 again, because I'm letting my body do what it's supposed to do, because we have more access to food than at any time in history. And that's not biologically how we were designed to put processed, shit into our bodies
We're
and be
hunter
eating it all the
gatherers.
time.
We had to constantly go hunt and gather and survive. We had to be moving constantly to pick plants and kill animals and get that workout. And now it's like Amazon puts it right at your door. You don't even have to go to the store.
And that's the other thing. I move all of the time. I get up from my desk throughout the workday unexplicably with no rhyme or reason and go walk in my grass barefooted for 15 minutes because it does something to ground me. And you know, these are the things that I want to call attention to, with this show and you're what you're doing, and maybe even public speaking for me. Maybe that's my avenue into public speaking, is talking about plant medicine, which you and I can talk offline about after we're done here. But I thank you for I had no idea because you didn't mention it, and I hadn't mentioned it to you. And yeah, well, and I think that's the fun part about doing this. So for those listening, I met Brian through Podmatch, and we have never spoken a word until he jumped on to record with me today. And so, this is kind of the power of doing, just being curious and wanting to have conversation. And I think this is the healing power of conversation, and you're seeing it live in action right now. And I think this is awesome, man. What do you think about it?
Oh, this is absolutely great. Yeah. I mean, what we've covered in this amount of time is insane.
Yeah, and it all goes back to, like you said, like all I'm trying to do is provide value to a community that I'm a part of, and I'm aware of the struggles, and saw a need to step up and do something, to do my part to stop, the destruction of our community by our own hands at that, and it's like I genuinely just want to share everything I've learned, what's worked for me, take it or leave it. I'm by no means an authority, but I can be an example, and you can use me as proof. Who loses 93 pounds in 11 months? Who does that?
Wow. That's nuts.
You know what I'm
I
saying? I
don't
mean,
think I've
like, if
ever
that's
heard
not
that. Yeah.
enough for you, I think I finally like balanced out, and I think I'm going to live kind of where I'm at now. But I've kind of tried kind of the idea in my brain of like, well, it's only another 8 pounds. I could fast for about 3 days just to say I hit the 100, and then kind of let it stabilize back to where I'm at now. But it's not really about a number for me. It's just genuinely about being in tune with myself and taking care of myself, and treating myself with love and respect. And it's funny because we're not taught that in the military, right? We're taught to the mission first, then the soldiers, then some other bullshit with the military, and then maybe you have time for yourself. So you never take care of yourself. And what I've been amazed by is, since I've actively started taking care of myself and paying attention and checking in with myself and doing the hard, deep work, looking inward and exercising regularly and moving my body and being mindful and grateful. Gratitude is a huge one for me. It seems like every other area of my life now just kind of falls into place where it's supposed to, and I don't have to give it a whole lot of attention. Do you agree with that maybe a little bit?
Yeah. It's amazing how much simpler and easier and clear life gets when you get healed. And that's the power, like you were just saying a minute ago, of a clear, powerful message. We think in words, we communicate in words, and if you're wanting to do something to make a difference, let's say with a cause, maybe it's for the plant medicine is getting more veterans healed through these things, like all of us have been healed so well. That takes words, a clear message that's compelling, that emotionally moves people to action, to participate and be a part of the collective healing and the difference that's being made, that they can be proud that they were a part of it. That all happens because of words. Words communicated by a voice, a figurehead, somebody getting up and saying what needs to be said in a way that's strategic and in a way that we know works according to how the human brain thinks. You want to make a big difference in the world, learn how to communicate clearly. That's like, if you do anything in the world, you learn one skill, know how to communicate clearly and in a compelling way. You can do anything, you can go anywhere if you can communicate clearly. And that's what professional speaking, if you when you learn how to do it, at least the way I do it, that's what it gives you that ability to do. It's like the priceless ability that anybody, pretty much at any age, from a teenager on, can learn and do. It'll make you so valuable in the marketplace if you have a job and you're that leader who can say, here's why we're here. And you can explain and people understand why it matters that they're there and why they're so important and what the clear, very easy to understand mission is and how it's going to happen and who's going to help and what they're going to do and why their role matters, not just what they're going to do, but why it matters what they do. So they know their work isn't just meaningless. You can use this as an entrepreneur. You can use this as a middle manager in a company. Learning how to communicate clearly will transform your life. And that's what happened on the plant medicines. We had those thoughts while on those healing journeys. And it was words, it was not always words. I say it was thoughts, but in the form of communication, which are the way we do is through words, at least words and thought. That's healed my life and it's obviously healed yours too.
Yeah, man. Yeah, for sure. What do the next few years look like for Use Your Story and your speaking, and what do you hope to accomplish?
I want to train up 1,000 more people to use their story and to get out there speaking, making a difference, being able to be financially productive doing it, which is why I created Use Your Story, so you can do it the right way, in a way that doesn't just project your story on the world, because that's not what's going to help the most, but positioning your story from a place of value that helps solve a problem, and therefore people want to be a part of it, people can be helped by it, and you can also be financially productive. And by the way, if anyone wants to learn more about Use Your Story, I'll just put it out there right now. If you go to useyourstory.com right now, there's a free resource right there. It's a big orange button right there on the website, and I'm going to give you for free something I created called the Share Your Story Roadmap. It's a one-page PDF with about a 14-minute video that goes with it. And I'll show you exactly how to share your story as a speaker and also make your first $500 speaking. It's pretty darn easy to do when you know the steps. And it's kindergarten paint by numbers simple. So if you go to useyourstory.com, if you're somebody who says, I want to speak for a cause, I want to share my story, I want to raise funds for a cause I believe in, whatever. If you want to share your story, if you want to use your story to do something productive and healing and helpful in the world, go to useyourstory.com, download that free Share Your Story roadmap. I'll show you exactly how to do it. It's easy when you know what to do. So that's free. I'm not selling you anything.
Hell yeah, brother. You have a customer in me, so you just need 999 more. I'm gonna dive into your stuff really hard here over the next several weeks and really learn how to go about this. And maybe that roadmap gets me my first 500 this weekend, but I'm all in on this, and having this conversation with you has really inspired me and proven to me that my intuition's right and that I do need to be pursuing something like this. So I'm super grateful for that. Based on your experience, man, what advice would you give to veterans who are transitioning out and are interested in entrepreneurship? And do you believe that entrepreneurship is a path back to purpose for veterans?
Absolutely, because it allows you to define very clearly your next mission. So many guys get out of the military and they don't have their next mission. And then they fall into this this limbo, this purgatory of meaninglessness if they're not going in a particular direction, on mission, on purpose long enough. If you sit around long enough not doing anything that you really care about, even if you have a lot of money, let's say you don't have to work anymore. People retire, they play golf for 2 weeks, then they just sit around. What happens? They die within like 3 to 5 years. They didn't select their next mission. They didn't plan their next mission. In the military, we're handed the missions. You get out of the military, on your way out, find your next mission before you get out. Maybe it's using your story by getting my free resource there. Maybe it's getting a job lined up with a company that you're going to be able to advance through, or whatever that is. Always have your next mission. Don't ever be caught dead without a mission. And maybe it's not your job. Maybe you get out and you're working, you're doing that because you have to pay bills, but then you have this other thing you really care about, kind of like you do. and you have this other idea, this thing you're building on the side because it matters to you. That is a mission. That keeps you going. It gives you a reason to be alive. People don't commit suicide when they have a mission to live for that's meaningful to them and that matters to them. People reach those horrible dark depths when they've lost all hope and they feel like they have nothing to live for. So if there's anything I can say, find your next mission before you get out of the military.
Hell yeah, man. Share with everybody where they can find you at, where they can buy your books, find all your resources, get in touch with you if they want to contact you about speaking, whatever, all the socials, everywhere you're at.
Yeah, if you want to book me to speak or see, with my books, stuff like that, all that speaking, just go to blownupguy.com. Just remember, I'm that guy who got blown up, and thousands of other guys got blown up. I'm just the guy who bought the website for $9. So blownupguy.com is where you go for that. If you want to, learn how to share your story and get started for free the right way and learn how to share it and be productive financially with it, so you can, give your family a better life in addition to making a difference, go to useyourstory.com, download that free Share Your Story roadmap. It's that simple.
Oh yeah, brother. Any last thought that you want to leave the audience with, my friend?
Try to find some meaning in your suffering. If you're suffering mentally with something, try to find meaning in it. And the best way I have personally found to do that is to get out there, get off your ass, and go find somebody else who's also struggling and try to help them. That's not going to inherently take away your problems. It's not going to fix what you're dealing with. But what it does do is it provides temporary relief because you can't think about how miserable you are when you're focused on helping somebody else. And when you help somebody else, it feels really good. And it reinforces a sense of meaning and satisfaction and fulfillment. The things that lead away from the dark pit that often ends with suicide or something of that nature. So be useful. Find problems and try to help fix them.
I love that, man. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Fleming, please don't forget to go like, rate, review, subscribe, answer the emails. If you have suggestions for guests, if you have questions for guests, please, I read and reply to all emails. Please send the emails, and we'll see you next week. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Fleming. Thanks for being here, Brian. We really appreciate it. Yeah, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
That's our show, and I'm truly thankful you've joined us at the Strategic Veteran. If our conversation today sparked curiosity or if you're ready to elevate your game, I'm here to help. Visit thestrategicveteran.com for exclusive show notes and resources or to book a coaching session directly with me. Take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and share your review. Your support makes all the difference. For more insights and daily strategies, let's connect on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Remember, this isn't just a podcast, it's your strategic advantage in action. Until our next rendezvous, stay bold and continue the mission.